Nobody talks about this because it makes people feel uncomfortable. I spent years studying what actually separates the people who build real wealth from the people who stay stuck. And it's not what any self-help book will tell you. It's not discipline, it's not work ethic, it's not even a morning routine. It's something most people would actually call a character flaw. Something your parents try to beat out of you or correct out of you. And the crazy part, every single person I studied who had real sustained success, not a lucky year, actual compounding success, has had this trait in their overdrive. And today we're gonna go deep in it. I'm talking psychology, neuroscience, real data, and why the advice you've been given your whole life about being a good person is probably keeping you broke. Now, this is one of the most important things I'll ever put on this channel, so let's get into it. The disgusting trait, so I studied 100 millionaires and they all had this one thing in common. Today, we're gonna take a deep dive under psychology and performance on what made them different and succeed. Let's get right into it here. So the trait nobody names. For decades, researchers studied peak performers that kept running into the same uncomfortable pattern. Call it confidence, call it audacity, delusion, the label, it keeps changing over time. But the underlying behavior was consistent across industries, backgrounds, and income levels. The trait is this: an almost irrational refusal to accept someone else's definition of what is possible for them. Most people experience this as a character flaw when they see it up close. It looks like arrogance, it feels like stubbornness, it gets labeled as narcissism in therapy circles. But the data tells a different story. How it was discovered. The research thread starts with Terman's Gifted Children study in 1921, one of the longest longitudinal studies in history. Terman tracked 1,500 high IQ children for decades and found that IQ was nearly irrelevant to who actually achieved extraordinary outcomes. What separated the top performers from the rest of them, you're asking? A cluster of traits that included persistence, confidence in their work, and critically, a tendency to set goals that made outside observers uncomfortable. And the key finding here is the highest achievers consistently set goals that their peers rated as unrealistic at the time they were set. Looking back, those same peers called them visionary. So why it gets mislabeled? Society has a vested interest in accurate self-assessment and keeps systems predictable. Schools grade on a curve. Employers set salary bands. Social groups enforce norms. People who refuse those reference points are disruptive, so they get pathologized. The same trait that drives outsized performance gets filed under ego problem because it makes average performers uncomfortable. In school, they call it a know-it-all. In work, they call it difficult or not a team player. In business, reckless or unrealistic. In success, once they make it, they are called a visionary. Same person, same trait, different label based on all outcomes. Okay, so before we go any further, I need to name the thing. The trait is this: an almost irrational refusal to accept someone else's definition of your ceiling. Most people call it arrogance. Therapists call it narcissistic tendencies. Your parents call it stubbornness. But here's what it actually is. It's a calibration error, a deliberate one. These people look at average outcomes, average timelines, average results, and they literally do not apply that data to themselves. Not because they're delusional, because they've decided that the average isn't their reference point. And the moment you start thinking like that, the way you make decisions, and the moment you start thinking like that, the way you make decisions completely changes. And that's what this whole video is about, and I'll prove it with the data. The neuroscience behind it. This isn't just philosophy. There's hard neuroscience and behavior psychology behind why this trait drives performance. The reference point problem: the human brain doesn't evaluate performance in absolute terms. It evaluates relevant. The human brain doesn't evaluate performance in absolute terms. It evaluates relative to a reference point. Change the reference point, and then you change what actions seem reasonable. So here's the mechanism. When you accept average outcomes as your reference point, average decisions feel safe. When you reject average outcomes as your reference point, the same decisions feel like obvious underperformance. So here's the Legg-Wobgen effect, and hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. Psychologists call it the illusory superiority, the well-documented cognitive bias where most people rate themselves as above average. But top performance display a very specific variant of this. 94% of college professors believe that they are above average teachers, a classic Lake-Wobbling finding. The top 10% of performance consistently underestimate their current skills, but overestimate their future potential. And the bottom 25% have the most accurate self-assessment of actual current skills. And this is the Dunning-Kruger inverse. The takeaway is that the people performing at the highest level are not operating on perfect self-knowledge. They're operating on a particular kind of forward-looking overestimation. And this is productive delusion versus destructive delusion. Now, there's an important distinction here. This isn't blanket overconfidence. The research separates two types. Here's the productive delusion and here's the destructive delusion. Underproductive is accurate assessment of current skills, overestimates future potential, drives stretch behavior and learning, very common in high performers. Now, if we look at under the destructive delusion, overestimates current skills, overestimates current potential, avoids feedback and learning, very chronic in underperformers. So here's what the psychology actually shows. There's a study that came out of Cornell and they asked people to rate their own abilities across 12 different skills. Across the board, the top performers underestimated themselves. The bottom performers massively overestimated. And you know who had the most accurate self-assessment? Average performers. Now think about what that means. The people who were objectively the best had a slight calibration problem in their favor, and the people who were the worst had a massive one. So the idea that accurate self-perception leads to better outcomes, that's not what the data shows. What leads to a better outcome is specific kind of productive delusion, not about your skills, but about your potential. Those are two different things, and confusing them is why people stay stuck. So the 4 ways it plays out in real life. Knowing what the trait isn't enough. Here's how it actually shows up in behavior in ways you can recognize and model. Pattern 1, selective reference points. High performers are ruthless about who they measure themselves against. They actively seek out the top 1% of any domain as their comparison point and filter out the median data when making decisions about their own ceiling. Example, when the average contractor earns $200,000 a year, most people anchor to that. High performers find the contractor doing $3 million and anchor to that instead. The available market is identical. The ceiling is self-selected. Pattern 2, reframing failure as data. The average person experiences failure as evidence that their goal was wrong. High performers experience failure as incomplete data about how to reach the goal. Average person says, I failed, maybe this isn't for me. High performer says, I failed, now I know what doesn't work. This isn't positivity, it's a functional belief system that keeps the reference point intact while updating the strategy. Pattern 3, asymmetric risk tolerance. Research from behavior economics shows that most people weight potential losses roughly twice as heavily as equivalent gains. This is the Kahneman's loss aversion here. High performers show a compressed version of this, closer to 101. So 2-to-1, average person's loss aversion ratio. The losses feel twice as bad as gains feel good. The 1.2-to-1 observed loss aversion ratio in consistent high income earners in multiple studies. Again, this isn't recklessness, it's a recalibrated relationship with downside that allows faster action and more attempts, which compounds into better outcomes over time. Then pattern 4 is social proof immunity. Most humans use social consensus as a proxy for truth. If everyone agrees something is impossible, the brain interprets that as evidence of impossibility. High performers show a documented pattern of treating social consensus as a lagging indicator, not a predictive one. They're not contrarian for the sake of it. They're just, learn that consensus reflects what has happened, not what can happen. So historical pattern here. Every major industry disruption in the last 50 years, whether it's personal computing, the internet, smartphones, streaming, EVs, was preceded by near universal expert consensus that it was impossible or impractical. The people who built those industries ignored that consensus. I want to tell you something that changed everything for me. I stopped taking advice from people who didn't have what I wanted. That sounds obvious, right? But think about who you actually listen to. Your parents, your friends, people commenting on your posts, people in forums. None of them have built what you're trying to build. And it's not that they're bad people, it's just that they're using their own ceiling as your reference point. When someone tells you that's too risky or that's unrealistic, they're telling you about their risk tolerance, their reality, their ceiling. The trait we're talking about today is the ability to hear all that and smile and do it anyway. Again, not because you're reckless, because you've decided your data set is different. That's the thing. That's the whole thing. So how to actually build this? The 3 exercises below are designed to systematically rewire your reference points. Do all 3 and the order matters. Exercise 1, the evidence audit. Do this week. Write down the most 5 limiting beliefs you hold about what's possible for you. For each one, trace where that belief came from. Who told you that this was your ceiling? Had they built what you're trying to build? What was their incentive for giving you this information? What would have to be true for this belief to be wrong? Most people discover their ceiling was installed by someone who had no business setting it. A parent who played it safe, a teacher who was frustrated, a peer maybe who was scared. Number 2, the reference point reset, and this is ongoing. For 30 days, deliberately seek out evidence of people 10x beyond your current position and your specific domain, not general success stories, people doing exactly what you're trying to do at a level that currently seems unreasonable. The mechanism, your brain calibrates normal based on repeated exposure. Control your inputs and you control your calibration. The rule, you are the average inputs you allow into your reference system, not just the people you spend time with. Your media diet, your social feeds, your peer group, curate them with this filter. Does this raise or lower my reference point? The productive delusion log, and this is done daily. Every morning, write 1 sentence completing this prompt. By set date, I will have specific outcome, and here is the 1 piece of evidence that this is possible, blank. The key is evidence piece here. You're not affirmations in your way to success, right? You're building a factual case for your own potential, 1 piece at a time. Over 90 days, this creates a personalized, evidence-based alternative to the ceiling that was handed to you. The people who build real sustained success are not operating on a better work ethic or a different opportunity set. They're operating on a different reference system. That system is trainable. Let's start today. Thank you very much. So here's the thing, what I want you to walk away with. This trait, this refusal to let someone else set your ceiling. It's not something you either have or you don't. It's trained. Every person you study who has this overdrive developed it. Every person you study who has this in overdrive developed it through evidence, through small wins stacked up, through deliberately choosing their inputs and their reference points. It doesn't start with believing you can do anything. It starts with questioning whether the person who told you what's possible actually had any business telling you that. Start there. If you want to go deeper on this, I broke down the full framework in the report we just went through. Link in the description and it's free. And if this hit different for you today, share it with 1 person. Seriously, someone who needs to actually hear this. And I'll see you in the next one. Thank you so much.